Welcome everyone, it's good to be with you all today. And I thought what we'd do first, just give you a bit of background to the two of us. So, as you know, I'm John, and I work at home as a coach. And actually I would say about 65-70% of my client base is working with people with chronic health conditions. So things like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, migraines, chronic pain, chronic Lyme. These are the kind of people that I see and speak to every day in my practice. And I find that humorous because I'm not a doctor. I know nothing about medicine whatsoever. I'm not qualified to talk about medicines or supplements or anything like that. And yet Karen and I did a study in 2017 where we worked with 24 people who had chronic fatigue syndrome. And we witnessed some incredible recoveries. We saw people who had been in wheelchairs with their fatigue. They came out of wheelchairs, they bought bicycles. We had other people who'd been ill for 30 years and they were just getting their life back. And all we were doing was sharing this understanding of the human mind. Karen has a slightly different background to me. Do you want to say a bit about that?
Yeah, so I've been a nurse in nursing for 25 years. 18 of those were spent in specialties of trauma and intensive care and flight nursing. And since the beginning of my career, I saw horrible medical errors occurring. Actually, a study, it was called a document called To Err as Human, came out in 2010 and pointed to medical error as the third leading cause of death in the United States. So that always affected my justice scale because I saw that in the hospital, people who had a medical professional in their family, who knew the right questions to ask, who knew how to get a second opinion, who knew the standard of care that should be delivered, they always had better outcomes. So I thought, well, this has to be a business. This has to be something where people can hire a nurse in the family if they don't have one. So in 2011, I spit myself out of the system. And I went to a course because I wanted to learn the legal ins and outs of being a private patient advocate and what that would entail. And I thought this course I went through at the University of Arizona was going to teach me that. That was about 5-10% of it. What I really learned was all about root cause of illness, functional medicine, systems biology, epigenetics, nutrigenomics, all these fancy terms that point to why people get sick in the first place. So I went to work and started my own practice, and I'll cut to the chase, we'll get to more of it later, but here I was going around to corporations and to individuals lecturing them about how to eat better, how to exercise better.
The broccoli conversation. The
broccoli dialogue as I came to know it, and then came across, my own experience, and then the experience of people like Lester Levinson, Anita Morjani, people who didn't change their diet, they didn't start getting more exercise, they didn't start getting more rest, they didn't start meditating or doing a mindfulness program. Their terminal illnesses went away sometimes overnight. So my main focus became, what's going on there? And that's kind of when John and I met. I was trying to find the language to explain what was going on there, and followed his blog. We ended up talking, and he said, have you ever heard of Sydney Banks? And I said, no, who's Sydney Banks? He's like, well, he was an enlightened Scottish woman. Like, I don't want to hear any more about enlightened people. I've learned enough about enlightened people. And then John kind of slipped in, okay, well, have you ever heard of Michael Neal? And I'm like, no. And he said, well, you wrote a book called The Inside Out Revolution. I'm like, revolution? I like that. And so I like that. That's the history.
Yeah, so, we're at an Understanding Human Mind conference, and my first thought when I think of that would be, well, what has that got to do with physical health, and how would that work? And it's worth saying that what we're about to talk to you about, we see as a foundational piece. So what we're saying is not if you get this understanding, you're suddenly going to be perfectly healthy and never get sick again, because I don't think that's true. What we are saying is that this component is actually a foundational piece. It's where you plant the seed for health, right? And we're so good at looking at health as something that we try and tackle with medicines and supplements, meditation, mindfulness. We don't consider the foundation upon which we're trying to do all of those things. So that's the bit that we want to try and bring to life for you guys today. And we're going to do that by sharing a bit of our own stories of healing. Now, to do that, I suppose there's the long version, which I'm not going to do because I know we're under time pressure, so we'll go for the short version. And to do that, we go back about 5 years in my journey. It was in 2014, and I'd been ill for 7 years at this point with chronic fatigue. What that meant was that I was constantly dealing with ebbing and flowing neurological symptoms, dizziness, heat intolerance, fatigue, nausea, feeling like I was going to faint all the time, utter exhaustion. And it was ebbing and flowing, and it seemed to have no pattern to it whatsoever. And I'd been through the medical system. I had all the tests you could imagine thrown at me. And I got to a point where I was like, maybe I just have to live with this. Maybe it's not going. Then in 2014, I was doing an apprenticeship with Michael Neal. And at the same time as that, I knew I had a holiday coming up in Turkey in the summer. And Turkey, as you know, pretty hot country in the summer, that's why people go there. And I had this problem of sunshine and heat intolerance. Not a good combination, you might think, right? And I really wanted to go on this holiday because I constantly felt like I was the drag of my family. You know, my kids didn't get to experience the nice things because Dad's sick. So I thought, I wonder if there's something I can do about this. And I went and had a conversation with Michael about it. Now at the time, I remember, it was a May sort of lunchtime, and it was one of those rare days in London where it was sunny. So that was usually a bad thing for me. So I remember going to this lunch and parking very specifically because I had to shadow walk. I couldn't walk in direct sunlight because if I did, within minutes I would start feeling sunburn, nauseous, terrible headaches, like I was going to faint. That's how crippling this had become for me. So I literally shadow walked in between buildings to this lunch. And I sat down with Michael and I said, you know, I told him what was going on. I said, have you ever come across this before? Any idea what might be going on? And his reaction, which might tickle the Romanian in Loredana, was he said, maybe you're a vampire. I was like, thanks. And then we kind of smiled and laughed it off. And then he said, well, maybe this is the power of thought to create your experience. To which my reply was a 4-lettered word beginning with F and ending in K with U and C in the middle. Because it seemed to me like he was telling me I was making up what was going on with me. And there was no part of me that felt like what was going on with me was at all made up. It was a very physical experience that I used to go through. The trouble is, I had a lot of respect for Michael, and I couldn't dismiss it that easily. So I left that lunchtime that day, and a seed had been sown. And I ended up about a week later going to see a functional medicine doctor that somebody had told me about. And they'd explained him as someone who was like a dog with a bone. So they said, you know, you go see this guy, he's going to help you. So I went and saw this chap, and again, the battery of tests and stuff was thrown at me. And he tested me for diseases and illnesses that I had never heard of in my life. And of course, all of them came back clear. And he said, but there's 2 test results that you've got which are really interesting to me. I said, oh, what are they? He said, well, your nutritional profile is really good. So you're eating well, you're getting everything you need. That wasn't a big surprise to me because I was very, very particular to make sure that I was fueling my body. So I supplemented and I did everything I could to try and make sure I was okay. Apparently it wasn't working though because I was still ill. But he said, the other test is really interesting. And I said, well, what is it? He said, well, it's an adrenal stress test. And he said, your cortisol levels, which is your stress hormone, they're through the roof. And your other hormones, they're on the floor. I said, well, how does that work? He said, well, your stress response rises when you're in a stressful situation. And he said, if you're in that commonly over a period of time, it will affect all your other hormones as well, because the building blocks for all of the body's hormones are all the same. So you're in a stress response enough, you'll see high elevated cortisol levels and all your other stuff will drop to the floor, which will explain some of why you're not feeling well. But he also said to me that when the body is in this fight or flight response, this emergency response that Bill was talking about, then the body thinks that it's fighting with a tiger, right? So it's not interested in immune system, not interested in digestion, not interested in detoxification. It's interested in escaping from the tiger. Because if it doesn't do that, you're dead, right? Well, I was living like that for some reason, 24 hours a day, or at least whilst I was awake anyway. And I began to think, well, what's the stress? Because it didn't look like I had a stressful life. I mean, I didn't have money worries. My relationship was fine. My kids were fine. I didn't have any concerns in the form. And then suddenly what Michael said to me came back. And he said, I remembered those words, maybe this is the power of thought to create your experience. And I remembered that if I knew I had to do something that was going to be in the sun, I could spend days, weeks, going round and round in my head thinking, what happens if I get the symptoms? And what's going to happen if I do that? And then I'm exhausted and I've got all these other things I've got to do the next few days. Well, I won't be able to do all of that. And then I won't be able to look after the kids. And then what about the work? And that was me, 24 hours a day in all of that. And it suddenly hit me, oh my God, I've lived my whole life like that. Not just whilst I was sick. I'd always been doing that. This was just the new version of it. And it suddenly occurred to me, maybe that's why you're sick. Maybe that's what's been breaking you down. And in that moment, I suddenly saw that the thing that I thought was keeping me safe, being in all of this noise, trying to figure it all out, that was the very thing that was making me sick. Now, what was incredible about it was I saw it and felt it. I had an insight. And what happened was, suddenly I stopped being afraid of all those symptoms because I knew what they were made of. And I found myself settling into a place of peace and just living my life with the symptoms, but no longer trying to do anything with them. And what had affected me for 7 years was literally gone in 4 weeks. And I had this rather unflattering photo taken of me on holiday in Turkey with my shirt off, which my kids delight in telling me they found on Google several times. Whilst they've been at school.
Yeah, and wasn't that the blog that I found?
And that was one of the blogs. Oh no, that was the one I wrote afterwards. You found the one I wrote a year before that. Yeah. So what I was seeing was that when I saw thought for what it was, the body had this natural intelligence built into it that was built to find healing. And that was news to me. Right? The vigilance that I lived in was actually keeping me sick.